All right, everyone, so welcome back to part 2. If you are joining me for the first time with this video, I recommend that you go check out the part 1 of this video so that you'll have some context about what we're talking about here. And before I get into the talk, as always, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon and YouTube, liking, subscribing, and those on Patreon especially who have contributed financially. I would not be able to do this without your help and support. So thank you, and I hope you get something from these talks. Okay, so one danger that can arise with witnessing or seeing, not judging, right, which we talked about in the last talk, is a kind of spiritual aloofness. Now there's two kinds of spiritual aloofness, we could say. There's a good kind and there's a bad kind, but I'm talking about the bad kind, where we very much disassociate from sometimes the physical body, sometimes from our entire life, and we sort of become inhuman. It doesn't mean inhumane. It doesn't mean you necessarily would do bad or evil things to others. But it just means that you're not really fully in life. And the spiritual tradition that I started with is the Zen tradition. And Zen Buddhism is very much about living this life in this moment as a doorway to so much more. So trying to escape or disassociate from our day-to-day experience, our day-to-day life, from the Zen perspective is not helpful or ultimately in line with our greatest truth. Okay? So this can show up sometimes as what's called the E-RYT trap or spiritual bypassing. These aren't the same things, but they're somewhat related in this regard, that sometimes we have, again, this sort of disassociation from the human aspect of our lives. We have a great spiritual awakening, or we see a certain spiritual truth, and then we try and deny the human aspect of our lives and our experience in favor of something as we see as more true or more real. So this can result in a kind of a coldness or harshness that can show up, or our life can become very bland or gray. It's like we don't care about anything. Nothing seems real or important. And this is sometimes why love, compassion, what in the yoga tradition is called bhakti, forgiveness, these can be very much emphasized on the path. It's said that Christ is 100% human and 100% divine, and this is what we are trying to realize. We want to emulate this, you might say. We want to be both 100% human and 100% divine. And our divinity or true nature is in love with all of creation. Like we talked about last time, God created everything and said it was good, and this judgment has not changed ultimately. So this is what we're trying to realize. Now, most people are too identified with their human aspect, and for them life is like a roller coaster. It's full of ups and downs. They're winning one day and then they're losing the next day. They are getting what they want one minute and then they're losing the next minute, and it's exhausting and it's tiring and it's frustrating. And we know this is the case for us if we aren't living day by day in peace and joy. We also know if we aren't very loving or compassionate with others that this is the case, okay? So again, Muso Kokushi, who was one of my favorite Zen teachers, he says the central benefit of Zen, you could put the word yoga in there if it's real yoga, and not just the exercise or workout. The real benefit of Zen or yoga in the context of the ordinary ups and downs of our life is not in preventing the minus and promoting the plus, but in directing us to the fundamental reality that is not under the sway of these ups and downs. Okay? So it's not that doing yoga or doing Zen is going to make you a winner from the egoic perspective. And usually that's what the ego wants. That's what it's looking for. So a lot of times the spirituality that the ego likes is spirituality where we're told we're going to be winners. Okay? Where we're told that if we pray, God's going to favor us and we're going to get what we want. Or if we meditate, it's going to rewire our brains so that we're smarter and more efficient and we're going to get what we want. This is what our ego is looking for. Okay? And as advantageous as those things might be, this is not true spirituality. Okay? I'm not saying don't pursue those things, but we just need to recognize this isn't really what Zen or yoga, or I would even say any real true spiritual tradition is about. Okay? So when we practice yoga in the right way, it puts us in touch with this fundamental reality that isn't under the sway of the normal everyday ups and downs. So how do we find this balance? How do we honor the human and the divine in ourselves simultaneously at the same time? Well, I'd like to share something with you that I've shared with students over the years, and this is just something I've come up with on my own as a teacher. It isn't something I learned from another teacher, but hopefully you find it helpful. I like to use the analogy of watching a film or a TV show. And you can't really enjoy a film or TV show if you do not identify with the characters at all. Maybe you've tried that. Maybe you watched the TV show and you just hated everybody, the main character. You didn't like them. You didn't identify with them. You couldn't understand them. And it's unlikely that you enjoyed the show or the movie because they just weren't likable or believable. Same thing with screenwriting or special effects, right? Did you ever watch maybe an old film and the special effects were so bad that you just couldn't believe that these people were experiencing what they were experiencing? And so it took you out of the experience. You weren't able to get drawn in or interested. And you always just sort of knew you were sitting there watching a movie. You couldn't enjoy that experience. So if you're not drawn into the world of a film or TV show, it's just not enjoyable, right? Well, this is the position of most people who have a great spiritual experience and then try and deny their human aspect. They sort of, again, disassociate, disidentify with the day-to-day, and they don't really live life with gusto. And there's a sort of, again, a aloofness to life and to other people and sometimes to the suffering of other people. And this is something we definitely want to avoid. On the other hand, the other thing that can happen, this is kind of the opposite, the yin and the yang, is let's say you're watching Mission Impossible. And all of a sudden, you're sitting there in your movie chair and you're watching, but all of a sudden you become Tom Cruise and you're hanging on the side of a cliff, right? You were watching Tom Cruise one moment, he's hanging by a finger on the side of a cliff, and then all of a sudden, snap, and you're there on the side of the cliff. So as long as you're, again, drawn into the film, when you were sitting there, maybe you don't like Tom Cruise or Mission Impossible, just insert whatever movie you like. You're drawn in, you're enjoying it, it's entertainment. The minute that you're there on the side of the cliff, now you are terrified, right? You are no longer enjoying it. Your heart is beating out of your chest. You look down, you see the ground below you. You're certain you're going to perish. It's not fun. In fact, it's probably a traumatic experience that you would live with for the rest of your life if that happened to you. Okay? So this is where most people are with their life. Okay? They are so identified with their ego, what's called the ego perspective, which is like the character in the movie of your life. All right? That's the kind of the story that you're telling yourself about yourself. I'm a man, I'm this old, I'm good at these things, I'm bad at these things. When you do XYZ, it makes me feel bad. When you do XYZ, it makes me feel good. All of this stuff. We identify with the thoughts, we identify with the emotions, we identify with the physical expression of our body. All right, so again, because of that, we tend to live in fear, with anxiety. We're so worried about this little character, we lose the perspective that in reality, this little character is not separate from anything, really. This little character is interacting with everything, is interdependent with everything, and this character's interests are intertwined with the interests of the entire universe and the whole cosmos. That might sound really heavy and like a lot, but it's true. And this now includes also our emotions and our thoughts. A lot of us think that our thoughts are private, our emotions are private. We can think whatever we want, and as long as we don't say or act on those things, it's okay. From a spiritual perspective, this is not the case. This doesn't mean we want to feel guilty about everything that we think or everything that we feel, but we definitely want to observe these things and notice these things in a very honest way. And as we do that, these things can begin to change. So this fear that many people have about life, this is true for many people who follow religion too. So I have to again distinguish between religion and spirituality. Not saying religion is necessarily a bad thing, but it is different than what I'm talking about. So we can't think, well, I have religion, so I'm not identified with these things. Most people that follow religion are. They actually are very much identified with the ego perspective. So it tends to be the case that unless we have a more direct experience of the divine ground of our being, we will not feel a sense of security, okay, in our life. The best way to enjoy the film is to be invested enough to care about the characters, but not so identified that we forget that we are the drashtu, right, from the first talk, the witness, the seer, the watcher. Okay, we're the one sitting in the seat, and the whole point of going to see a movie or Mission Impossible, whatever it is to enjoy yourself. It's meant to be interesting, entertaining. It's something to do, okay? So when we are suffering through our life because we're so scared, again, if you're too identified with the characters, you're going to suffer. This sometimes happens when we play video games, right? I think it happens a little more with video games than with movies. We identify too much with winning the game, and we can get really upset, right? When our little character in the video game dies, we might throw a temper tantrum or hit the machine or get upset. It's just a game. And if we're not having fun, then stop, right? Is there any other reason to play a video game than to enjoy it? Not unless you're a professional, and I'm not talking about that, okay? So, if you know your spiritual ground, you will have some balance there. If you don't, you will tend to lack that balance. If you become too spiritually aloof, however, okay, so you have a spiritual experience, you go on retreat, you have a great spiritual insight, you see past lives, you maybe see the futility of the wheel of samsara and life after life, living and trying to strive and do all this stuff, and then you realize that, oh, you know, it's just this thing over and over again. We can get a sort of bitter taste in our mouth, okay? And we might think, well, what's the point? Forget it. It's not real. Again, like a movie, right? A movie isn't real. A movie can be very enjoyable if we have the right frame of mind. If we don't, however, it can be not a good experience. So if you're too spiritually aloof, you will not enjoy life either. It'll be like watching a movie you don't care about, and life is meant to be enjoyed. So my favorite name personally for our true nature, the watcher or whatever, the witness, is actually the enjoyer. In some translations of some scriptures, it names our true nature as the enjoyer, and I just love that. I think that that hits the nail on the head. In my experience, if we can be 100% human, and we also 100% know our ground of being, our divinity, then we can really enjoy life and we are fully alive. All right, if we don't have both of those things, we might be technically alive, and this is true of many people. They are technically living, but they actually don't realize that they are, you could say, half alive and also half dead. They aren't really alive. And then once again, if we are too identified with a deep spiritual perspective, we try and deny the day-to-day, and then we might go and meditate for hours and hours and have blissful experiences, but we're trying to deny our humanness and this experience of being human, which is just as spiritual and just as deep as any meditation, in my experience. So in the Heart Sutra from Buddhism, one of the lines says, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. This is what we're talking about here. Divinity, emptiness, is the same as our everyday experience. If we haven't seen this or grasped this completely, then our understanding is not really complete. In Zen, we like to say there is no difference between the sacred and the profane, and this is also a part of that teaching. So anyway, everyone, I hope that this was helpful. These are very advanced, very deep spiritual concepts. So if you're confused by them, it's okay, don't worry. You can put this video aside for another time, or you can come back and listen to it many times, and each time you may get something a little different from it. This has been my experience with spiritual teaching, is repetition is very, very helpful. So whether it's this video or another video I made, don't be afraid to come back at another time and listen again and see if you get something different from it. So as always, everybody, I want to thank you for listening. Again, I know this might have been difficult to understand. I want to thank everyone who supports me, whether it be on YouTube with a thumbs up or a subscription or by commenting, and definitely everyone on Patreon. As I mentioned, I do have an event coming up on the 4th of September 2021. I hope you'll check that out on the Patreon page. All the details are there, so if you're in Georgia, come and join me. And let me know if there are any questions. Let me know your experience with these concepts. Okay, I'd love to hear from you. And if there's any way possible that I can assist you on your journey, if you feel a connection there, you feel that something I'm saying resonates with you, you feel I can help you, please, please, please reach out and let me know. Nothing would make me happier than to hear from you. Okay, everybody, until next time, namaste and have a great day.